The room already smells wrong when the coroner stops reading. It's January 1935. Late afternoon light presses through half-closed blinds in a small county office just east of downtown Los Angeles. Dust floats in the air like it's unsure whether to settle. A wall clock ticks too loudly. Every tick lands. The coroner's finger rests on a single typed line. He doesn't clear his throat. He doesn't look up right away. The paper is thin, the kind that shows fingerprints if your hands are even slightly damp. He knows that. Across the table, Eddie Mannix doesn't move. He sits straight-backed, hat placed carefully beside his chair, hands folded as if in church. His suit is dark, conservative, expensive without advertising it, the kind of suit that never looks wrinkled because it's never been rushed. He's not supposed to be there. Everyone in the room knows that. Nobody mentions it. The coroner finally speaks, his voice low, mechanical, stripped of flourish. "Carbon monoxide intoxication," he says, then he pauses. The room waits. There were no defensive wounds. He stops again. Eyes flicker, not to Mannix, never directly to Mannix, to the corners of the room, to the door, to the floor. Mannix says nothing. Not a word, not a nod, not disagreement, not approval. He simply breathes in through his nose and exhales once, slowly, like a man settling into a pew. It is the longest sound in the room. The silence is the response. The name on the report is already known to everyone there. They don't need to say it again. Thelma Todd, actress, known face, known laugh, known photograph, a woman whose smile had been printed and reprinted until it barely belonged to her anymore. She was found slumped in her car the night before, parked inside a garage above the city. The engine still warm, the doors closed, her head tilted slightly forward as if caught mid-thought. The papers will call it tragic, accidental, a careless end after a long night. But the tone in this room is not accident. It is negotiation. The coroner clears his throat now. He senses he has already said enough. Someone at the far end of the table shifts. A man from the district attorney's office, young, too young to be in this room. His pen twitches then stills. He doesn't write anything. Mannix's gaze finally lifts not to the coroner but to the wall behind him. A faded calendar, a photograph of a fishing boat, anything but a person. His eyes are calm, unblinking. He doesn't need to speak, he never has. This is his job. Not officially, not on payrolls that show up in ledgers, but everyone in Hollywood knows the title he never uses. Fixer, resolver, the man who makes sure stories end correctly. Correctly does not mean truthfully. It means quietly. If you watch closely, you see the moment land. It's almost imperceptible. The coroner's shoulders drop a fraction of an inch, as if he's just been relieved of something heavy without having to ask. No objections. No questions. No follow-up. Mannix does not ask how the gas could have built up. He does not ask why she was alone. He does not ask why certain details from the scene were delayed before being logged. He lets the gaps exist. That is the message. If the silence holds, this is the ending. The report continues. Routine language, procedural phrasing, enough to satisfy anyone who isn't in this room. Outside, the city hums, unaware that a version of events has just been chosen. A junior clerk shifts in his chair. He looks like he wants to be anywhere else. He will forget this day, or he will tell himself he misremembered it. Mannix stands. That's when the tension spikes. Chairs scrape slightly. A mistake, too loud. Mannix's movement is slow, unhurried. He reaches for his hat, places it on his head, adjusts it precisely. Still no words. At the door he pauses, not dramatically, not for effect, just long enough for the room to understand that this was not a meeting. It was a signal. After he leaves, the coroner stares at the paper again. The line he read has already hardened. Ink becomes fact when nobody contests it. Later that evening, studio phones ring. Carefully, editors are advised on wording. Publicists receive guidance framed as concern. Headlines are shaped without being dictated. Eddie Mannix never calls anyone directly. He doesn't need to. By morning, the story has teeth pulled, edges smoothed, speculation gently redirected. Friends of Thelma Todd receive condolences from people who never knew her well enough to say her name aloud. Behind closed doors, rumors circulate anyway. They always do. Whispers about her associations, about men who didn't like to be refused, about debts, about leverage, about things said too loudly and things overheard by the wrong people. But rumors cannot breathe without oxygen. And oxygen has just been removed. In the days that follow, no one mentions seeing Mannix at the coroner's office. Officially, he wasn't there. There is no record of his presence. The fix leaves no fingerprints. What remains is an approved narrative and a collection of people who understand, instinctively, what asking further questions would cost. The coroner sleeps poorly that week. He wakes once in the night, convinced he forgot to file something. In the morning, he realizes the fear is not about paperwork. It's about memory. In Hollywood, memory is dangerous when it's unaligned. Years later, people will argue about what really happened to Thelma Todd. They will point to timelines, toxicology reports, witness statements. They will search for a smoking gun in a room that was swept clean while the occupants were still seated. But the most important moment never made it into evidence. It wasn't the garage. It wasn't the car. It wasn't the body. It was a room where a line was read aloud, and the most powerful man present responded with nothing at all. And in that nothing, a decision was locked in. Nothing changes immediately, that is how power prefers it. The death notice runs small, folded into the paper like an afterthought. The language is gentle, regretful, an unfortunate accident following a late evening. The city absorbs it the way it absorbs most things, quickly, without resistance. But inside studio offices, doors begin closing more often than usual. Conversations stop mid-sentence when assistants enter. Scripts are set aside. Telephones are answered with too much politeness. Everyone senses a correction has been made and no one wants to test its strength. The pressure does not announce itself, it never has. It moves through favors owed and favors remembered, through reminders delivered as kindness. A producer who once dined with Thelma Todd mentions her name at lunch. The table goes quiet, not abruptly, softly, as if a window has been opened somewhere else and a draft moved through the room. Someone clears their throat, someone else suggests dessert. He does not say her name again. At MGM, Eddie Mannix returns to his office and resumes his routine as if nothing has happened. That is part of the design. Routine makes anomalies disappear. He signs documents, attends meetings, nods at junior executives who lower their voices when he passes. He never discusses the coroner's report. He doesn't have to. His silence has already done the work. Mannix's power comes from understanding how fear behaves. It doesn't thrive in noise, it thrives in implication. The people who knew Thelma well enough to worry begin receiving calls, friendly calls, careful ones. One club owner is advised it might be better to cancel a memorial gathering. Too public, too emotional. The suggestion comes wrapped in concern for safety and decorum. The message beneath it is unmistakable. A reporter drafts a longer piece questioning the circumstances of her death. His editor reads it quietly, then folds the pages once and places them in a drawer without comment. By the end of the week, the reporter is reassigned to theater listings. No explanation is given. That is also part of the lesson. Behind closed doors, the district attorney's office reviews the file. There are oddities, small things, a neighbor who heard something earlier than reported, a timeline that seems compressed, the smell in the garage lingering longer than expected. None of it rises to the level of confrontation, not legally, and legal thresholds matter less here than cultural ones. One assistant DA suggests reopening questions, just a suggestion. It's delivered carefully in the tone of someone testing water temperature with their toe. The room does not argue, no one raises their voice. One senior official simply asks a question. Do you want to be remembered as the man who caused unnecessary confusion? It is not a threat, it is framed as advice. The assistant withdraws the suggestion. He will later tell himself it was the practical choice. Days stretch into weeks, the story settles, Hollywood moves on, productions continue, contracts are negotiated, smiles return to photographs. And yet something lingers. People who were once comfortable talking loosely about backstage affairs become more guarded, jokes lose their endings, secrets are carried with both hands now. Because everyone understands something fundamental has been demonstrated. It isn't that Eddie Mannix protected MGM. It's that he showed what protection looks like when it is absolute. The fix didn't require falsifying evidence, it didn't require coercion on paper, it required presence, placement, timing. The right man in the wrong room at the exact right moment. And then silence. That is how the industry polices itself. At night, those closest to the case replay moments in their heads. The coroner wonders why the quiet bothered him more than direct instruction ever could. The DA's assistant Ray hears his own voice making a suggestion he already knew wouldn't land. They all come to the same unspoken realization. This was not about Thelma Todd alone. This was about reminding everyone that narratives are not discovered, they are approved. And approval does not come from public consensus, it comes from men whose authority is never printed. Months later, a peripheral figure connected to Thelma quietly leaves Los Angeles. No scandal, no drama, just a relocation that seems voluntary until you look closer, a lease not renewed, a partnership dissolved, a phone that stops ringing. People tell themselves these are coincidences. Hollywood relies on that habit. Eddie Mannix continues attending meetings where morality is discussed in abstract terms. There is talk of public image, of decency codes, of protecting women from reputation damage. He listens, occasionally nods. He does not speak about Thelma Todd, because speaking would suggest debate. And there is none. The real consequence of the coroner's line is not the verdict, it's the after effect, the way everyone recalibrates their behavior without being told to. The way questions become dangerous not because they will be punished, but because they will be noticed. Years later, when Mannix's name comes up in history, it will be accompanied by polite euphemisms: studio executive, enforcer, loyal problem solver. Those words fail to capture what actually happened in that room. What happened was a demonstration of how fear operates when it wears a suit and never raises its voice. And the most chilling part is that it worked perfectly. Until someone much later would look back and realize that the silence itself was the loudest statement of all. And that it may have cost more than a reputation. Years pass, that is when the danger sets in. Time creates distance, and distance makes people careless. The studio system evolves, new stars arrive, old power brokers age, names like Eddie Mannix shift from daily presence to whispered legend. But the silence from that room in 1935 never actually leaves. It just becomes harder to hear. By the late 1940s, some of the people who were adjacent to Thelma Todd's final days begin to talk. Not publicly, not on record, in living rooms late at night, over drinks poured a little too generously. They don't accuse, they reminisce, and in that softness fragments slip through. A paused conversation here, a phone call that ended too quickly, the sudden realization that asking the wrong question never brought an answer, only absence. What emerges is not a new version of events. It's something more unsettling. A pattern. People start to understand that Thelma Todd's death wasn't remarkable because it was solved incorrectly. It was remarkable because it demonstrated how unnecessary force had become. Nobody had to instruct the coroner. Nobody had to threaten the DA's office. Nobody had to alter a file. All that was required was presence followed by silence, and a room full of adults adjusted themselves accordingly. That realization lands slowly, and once it does, it doesn't let go. Some of the men who lived long enough to reflect on the era later describe a strange guilt, not for what they did exactly, but for what they didn't do, for the way they accepted the narrative because it arrived already complete. One former studio employee admits decades later that the most frightening thing was Mannix's reputation. It was how relieved everyone seemed after he left the room. Relief meant clarity. Clarity meant permission to stop thinking. And that, more than fear, is how systems endure. By the time historians begin seriously re-examining Thelma Todd's case, many primary witnesses are gone, files are thin, memories are degraded, contradictions pile up without resolution. The silence did its job too well. Eddie Mannix dies having never addressed the incident publicly. No confession, no denial, no memoir clarification. That absence becomes his final act of consistency. Because speaking would have changed the balance. The most haunting part of the story isn't whether Thelma Todd's death was accidental, negligent, or something more deliberate. It's that the question itself became irrelevant in the moment that mattered most. When the coroner read that line. When Mannix said nothing. When a room chose ease over certainty. From that day forward, everyone involved understood something they would never admit out loud. Hollywood didn't just create illusions on screen. It perfected them off screen too. And sometimes, the most powerful decision isn't what a man says to control a story. It's what he withholds. Because silence doesn't leave evidence. It leaves compliance.